Welcome to the Blessors of Israel Podcast. I'm Matthew Dodd, Executive Director of Blessors of Israel. Honored to be in studio today with Pastor Rich Jones. He's the founder and chairman of Blessors of Israel. Today, a significant progress has been made between Hezbollah, Lebanon, and Israel. Pastor Rich, perhaps you can share the details with our viewers.
It is the big news of the day. It is on all of the news sources. And of course, the big news is that Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to a 60-day ceasefire. Now, 60 days. The hope, of course, is that it's the beginning of a longer-term agreement for ceasefire, brokered by primarily the United States, but I think also France was involved with that. But it's a big deal. I mean, it's absolutely huge. Interestingly, I think we should talk about the terms of this ceasefire and what the implications are of this. Firstly, it's 60 days, right, a 2-month. And the idea here is that Israel will withdraw back to their borders, and that Lebanon will input, let's say, about 5,000 soldiers to take over the area now and to monitor so that Hezbollah cannot rebuild, and that's part of the agreement.
And Hezbollah removes themselves from that area.
Well, presumably they've been mostly removed, but they cannot rebuild. That's the agreement.
No, they did say they will rebuild, help the people rebuild their settlements and their lives back in the southern border.
And I think that is a part of it. I mean, I think that there has been great displacements. Israelis in the north, 60,000 plus have been displaced now for well over a year, just over a year. And now, of course, citizens in South Lebanon have been displaced as well. So there's going to be a re-establishment of the population back because of the terms of the peace. Now, what's going to happen in 60 days when it all, breaks loose again? The hope, of course, is that it holds.
Exactly.
But Lebanon will put in 5,000 troops. The UN will put in some troops. An international force will be there. Although that's another topic of discussion because, there was an agreement for a ceasefire back many years ago. And 2006, thank you. And the UN was supposed to be the peacekeepers to prevent what happened when Hezbollah rebuilt. It was absolutely ineffective. They did not prevent anything which brought about this war. Now, the idea is that Israel has in the ceasefire that should Hezbollah not abide by these terms, that Israel has the right to bring force to bear against Hezbollah from the Litani River south. Now, the Litani River runs about parallel to the northern border of Israel and Lebanon. It's about 15 miles average, let's say, north of the border with Israel and Lebanon. And that is the boundary. The Litani River is the boundary. So now Israel is saying if Hezbollah starts to rebuild south of there, they have every right by this agreement to come in and bring a tremendous amount of force. If they detect any movement of shipment of arms, if they detect any rebuilding of the tunnels, they are going to bring tremendous force. So says Israel.
Yes, when Netanyahu gave his speech today to the state of Israel, those were the things that he was talking about because he knows that it's not a popular move that he's making here. You only have about 20% of the population that supports this, but he believes this gives Israel the opportunity, number one, to focus its attention on Iran. That's a grave concern that Israel rightly has, especially when it comes to Iran making progress on the nuclear weapons front.
Right.
It also gives Israel the chance to give their troops the opportunity to get refreshed.
Right.
There's been a limit in the number of munitions and weapons that Israel has, and so that gives them a chance to rebuild as well. And then third, it gives Israel the opportunity to focus on Hamas.
Right.
And bringing peace to the Gaza Strip, because before, ever since October 8th, Hezbollah has been working with Hamas to create this two-front war scenario. So now Hamas is isolated,
Right.
and that gives Israel the opportunity to focus on bringing the remaining hostages home.
And Hamas, no doubt, is taking careful note of this. And it's going to bring a tremendous amount of pressure against Hamas so that they also would agree to some form of ceasefire. What that looks like will be interesting. But Hezbollah has agreed that they are not going to rebuild. That's what they say. They have agreed that Israel has the right to attack should they try to rebuild. Seems like Hamas would agree to something similar to that. That's the presumption.
Agreed. Interestingly enough, yesterday it was reported that Iran's Ayatollah came out saying that he believes the leaders of Israel need to be sentenced to death. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about during our last podcast with the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants
Right.
for Netanyahu and Gallant,
Right.
which, by the way, it's important to note that the International Criminal Court doesn't have any jurisdiction over Israel, like it doesn't have jurisdiction over the United States either.
Correct.
But here you have, on the one hand, Iran saying, Hezbollah, you have the liberty now to engage with Israel in some type of ceasefire. On the other hand, we think the leaders of Israel should be executed,
Right.
put to death.
But it's rhetoric in in many ways. Look, Iran is on their heels,
They are.
right? I mean, Hamas is essentially decimated.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Netanyahu, in his speech, said of Hezbollah, Nasrallah was the one who died, and he called him the axis of the axis.
Yeah, true.
And I think in many ways,
Yeah.
there's some truth to that.
But look at Iran now. So they've lost their proxy in Hamas. They've lost their proxy in Hezbollah. Their air defenses have been destroyed. Israel destroyed their air defenses. So, I mean, they are on their heels.
They even did a strike towards some of the nuclear
Exactly.
facilities that were housing, you know, the equipment necessary for building nuclear weapons. So very fascinating. They are on their heels. I mean, basically, this axis of resistance is nothing compared to what it used to be a year ago. And Netanyahu said, look at what we have done over the course of this last year. No one would have believed we would have come this far.
That's right.
And accomplished what we've accomplished.
And the people of Israel did not believe that this would be accomplished. And in many ways, there was a lot of headwinds against Netanyahu to go as far as he has done. And now the vast majority say, don't stop.
Well, and it's interesting because Netanyahu in his speech said, you doubted
Right.
back then.
That's right.
It's time to believe.
That's right.
You doubted that we would do what we needed to do in Gaza with the Philadelphia corridor,
That's
and Khan Yunis and all these other locations. Look what we did. You said we were told that if we stopped that we would never re-engage, but we did. And the same thing will be true to the north with Hezbollah in Lebanon if necessary.
I mean, Israel has completely turned this narrative. They've completely turned this story around. Now, it's also come at a great cost. I mean, there's a lot of anti-Semitism, even more today than ever before. Not ever before, but in the last number of years. It's come at a great cost. And so Israel, I believe, calculated that cost and decided, look, they have to take their future and their security in their hands, and they're going to do what they have to do to secure these borders. And that's exactly what they've done. To the surprise of the world, they've done.
So, on the one hand, we're pleased to see that there is this potential.
Yes.
But realistically speaking, what are your thoughts when we look at the history between Israel and her enemies? What's the realistic estimate of how long this is going to last?
Well, that's a good question. But I think what we do want to look at is what's the difference between this agreement and the one that was made in 2006? I think that's key. Israel has learned that they can't trust Hezbollah. Clearly, they cannot. They cannot trust the UN. That clearly has also been made very clear. So Israel now has negotiated by great strength an agreement that says if you violate this in any way, we have the right by this agreement to come in full force, we will enforce it ourselves. We're not going to be dependent on the UN. We're not dependent on the United States. We're not going to be dependent on anyone. If you violate this agreement in any way, shape, or form, we will bring great force to bear. That's the difference.
And it's significant because that was one of the sticking points for Hezbollah.
That's right.
They felt like if you gave Israel that latitude to strike, if a portion of the deal was broken by Hezbollah, that violated Lebanon's sovereignty. But eventually, they conceded.
And why? Because they realized if they don't agree to something here, Israel is not going to stop.
In fact, right as this was all going down, there were 20 strikes on strategic targets by Israel within 2 minutes.
Yes.
And in fact, one of the leaders in Hezbollah, actually it's surprising to see that there's any that actually are still alive and are not in hiding somewhere. He said this is the most dangerous time right now for Lebanon, in between now and when this ceasefire is enacted at 4 a.m. Tomorrow.
Right. Well, in actuality, I think it's by the time that our viewers see this, the ceasefire will be
It'll be in place.
As we are recording this right now, it's something like 2 or 3 in the morning. There, it's almost the time of the ceasefire. So Israel is taking full advantage of this opportunity to try to secure what they can secure. But again, they've learned, and now they have implemented, because of the force that they've used. Hezbollah is essentially saying, if we don't agree to something, we will have nothing. Now, what will that translate to is regarding Hamas. I believe that Hamas will take note and that they're going to come to some kind of terms. I believe that's next.
I agree. I mean, that's what Netanyahu said. The focus, number one, is on Iran.
Right.
And the focus, number two, is on Hamas because the hostages must come home.
Exactly. And, I mean, Netanyahu has taken a tremendous risk here by not making a deal earlier with Hamas. The pressure was very, very heavy. Compromise to get those hostages home. And he had to take a very, very difficult stance of saying we have to secure our future.
And in fact, that's what he said in his speech.
Right.
He said, yes, you were pushing for the hostages, for that compromise, but there were other objectives that needed to be accomplished.
Yes.
And ultimately, I think that brought greater credibility. It brought him into a position of strength so that they could negotiate a treaty such as this.
And when they struck Iran as hard as they did, and it was a very strategic move, what they did there. They took out all their air defenses, all in one wave of attack. And so Iran now is going to think very, very carefully about their next move. The United States came in great force. They have brought their forces right into the sea, right next to Israel. They have made their statement very clear.
Though they did remove a carrier, but they still have destroyers that are there.
Exactly. But their point that they made is we are standing with Israel against Iran.
And with the new administration, we've been told that the munitions, the things that have been held up, that Netanyahu mentioned, known to the public, they're expecting that supply to be turned back on, and they'll be reinforced shortly.
I would like to do another podcast really on what now that we're going to have a new administration, what really does that mean for Hamas, the Middle East, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, and Turkey, and Ukraine, and Russia. I think it changes the whole dynamic
Couldn't agree more.
of world politics.
Couldn't agree more. Well, this has been a great, great time. Again, please keep Israel in your prayers, even with things like this, the peace treaty, the ceasefire. History shows us that sometimes they are short-lived, but in light of the terms, in light of the fact that Israel's now negotiating from a position of strength, and they've proven that they're going to keep their word, hopefully that will keep Israel's enemies at bay for a season, but continue to pray for Israel and for her people during these difficult times. We're so grateful that you've joined us today for our podcast. We want to invite you to visit our website. It's located at www.blessors.org. That's blessors with an ORS.org. We want you to see our vision and our mission as a ministry. We want you to also understand, by looking at the newsroom, our articles, a biblical perspective about what's going on with Israel in the Middle East, so that you can be informed, to know how to stand with Israel in the latter days, to know how to pray for Israel as well. So make sure you check out our newsroom. We encourage you to follow us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and also Getter. We encourage you to subscribe to this channel and also make sure you like this podcast as well. We covet your prayers and your financial partnership as we continue to strengthen this ministry. We believe God has called Blessors of Israel for such a time as this to have an impact, to increase the awareness of the Christian community about the importance of standing with Israel in the latter days. So we covet your prayers. We also appreciate your financial partnership as well. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Remember, those who bless Israel will be blessed. Shalom, shalom.